Perhaps it was because of the unfamiliar bed, but Song Wensi couldn't sleep her first night back in Yanqing. The next morning, when she went downstairs with dark circles under her eyes, she saw her mother, Lin Shuring, walking in with a sharply dressed man. "Wensi, come over and meet your uncle," Lin Shuring said. Song Wensi's mind buzzed. After 6 years apart, she never expected to see Zhou Yili again. The man's tall and composed figure was right in front of her now. His expression was aloof, and his dark, ink-black eyes slowly landed on her. Wensi. She had to admit, he had changed a lot over the past 6 years. The face was still familiar, but the icy aura he exuded now sent chills down her spine. Song Wensi instinctively stepped back. Lin Shuring didn't seem to notice the odd tension in the air. Smiling, she put an arm around Song Wensi's shoulder. "Wensi, greet your uncle." If she had known Zhou Yili was her mother's new husband's younger brother, Song Wensi would never have come back. Now, stuck in this awkward situation, she struggled to find her voice, but the words "uncle" just wouldn't come out. After a long pause, she finally managed a faint "hello." Lin Shuring, who hadn't seen her daughter in years, didn't realize when she had become so reserved. Feeling a bit embarrassed, she turned to Zhou Yili. "I'm sorry, Ali. Wensi's just a little shy." Zhou Yili gave a faint, non-committal smile but didn't respond. Lin Shuring then remembered why they were there and pointed upstairs. "Yanting is in the study. You can go find him there." Zhou Yili nodded and walked upstairs. After he left, Lin Shuring turned back to her daughter. But before she could say anything, Song Wensi took her arm and, in a sudden burst of cheerfulness, began to act coy. "Mom, I was just caught off guard for a moment. Sorry about that." Lin Shuring tapped her forehead lightly, the reprimand dying on her lips. Her daughter had been abroad for years. It was understandable that she wasn't used to social niceties back home. After all, her uncle was only a year older than her. That afternoon, Song Wensi brought her luggage back home. By the time she finished dealing with all the formalities, it was already dark. Her mother and stepfather didn't seem to be home. The sprawling villa was completely dark. As she fumbled for her phone, Lin Shuring's call came through. "Wensi, your uncle Yanting and I have to go to a neighboring city for some business. I've asked Ali to take care of you. He'll be staying with us for the time being. Please get along well with him." Her mother and Zhou Yanting had met through work. As two workaholics, they had quickly grown close. But hearing this, Song Wensi froze. Before she could respond, a car horn honked behind her. "Is that Ali? He's already there? Great. I've got to go now. I'll call you later." Lin Shuring hung up, reassured by the noise in the background. Song Wensi turned to see Zhou Yili walking toward her. The words slipped out before she could stop herself. "Why are you here?" As soon as she spoke, she realized how dumb the question was. Sure enough, Zhou Yili glanced at her indifferently. "Didn't your mother tell you?" Song Wensi's fingers tightened around her phone. She didn't answer. Zhou Yili didn't press the matter. Instead, he turned and took his luggage out of the trunk. Noticing the stack of suitcases by her side, he raised an eyebrow. "Need help?" She quickly shook her head. "No, thank you." Without insisting, Zhou Yili strode toward the front door. Only after he entered the house did Song Wensi snap out of her daze. Looking at his retreating figure, what on earth was happening now? It took Song Wensi several trips to move all her things inside. Seeing Zhou Yili sitting on the sofa, absorbed in his phone, she frowned slightly. Her mother had messaged her again earlier, reminding her to get along with him. She felt a headache coming on and rubbed her temples. Yanqing's July was the peak of summer. Even at night, the temperature showed no signs of cooling. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead. She wiped them away and, seeing Zhou Yili's calm, unreadable expression, hesitantly said, "I can take care of myself. You really don't need to trouble yourself with me." She wasn't ready to face him yet, let alone live under the same roof. Zhou Yili raised an eyebrow. What's this? Are you afraid of me? Caught off guard, Song Wensi froze. After a long pause, she stiffened her neck and said, "Why would I be afraid of you?" Zhou Ili lounged on the sofa, his posture relaxed, his gaze fixed on her with a faint smile tugging at his lips. You know the reason. 6 years ago, Song Wensi had abruptly dumped him and left for another country. For a long time after, he had searched for answers. By the time he found a way to contact her, she was already abroad. The only response he got was her casual, cutting remark, "I'm tired of it." He had wanted to go after her, but across thousands of miles of phone lines, her voice was as cold as ice. She had said, "Zhou Ili, can't we leave each other some dignity? Why make it so ugly? You got plenty of girls who like you." Zhou Ili had tried to say something but found himself at a loss for words. In the silence that followed, Song Wensi hung up the phone. Song Wensi returned to her room and changed out of her dirty clothes. When she went downstairs, Zhou Ili was cooking. In the spacious and well-lit open kitchen, he stood there with his back to her. The soft, warm light enveloped him, creating a serene glow. During their 2 years together, she had imagined their future countless times, envisioning a sweet and cozy home they could share. But everything stopped on that day. Hearing footsteps, Zhou Ili turned around and saw her standing still at the bottom of the stairs, slightly stunned. Then, he carried the prepared noodles to the dining table and instructed, "Wash your hands and eat." Without responding, Song Wensi walked straight to the table. Zhou Ili said no more and sat across from her. The dinner was silent. Afterward, Song Wensi wanted to talk to him again, but Zhou Ili cut her off with, "If there's a problem, talk to your mother," before heading back to his room. Her mind was a mess, but she couldn't really approach her mother. What reason could she give if questioned? That night, Song Wensi couldn't sleep again. Her thoughts were consumed by Zhou Ili's face. 6 years had passed. She thought she'd moved on. Yet seeing him again made her realize that her feelings had merely been sealed away, not erased. The next day, Wensi woke to the sound of her phone ringing. News of her return had already spread among her friends. Wen Ning, her best friend, was the first to call. "We're throwing you a welcome party tonight. Are you free?" Song Wensi used to live in a compound where her biological father's colleagues also resided. She and Wen Ning had grown up together. Even after her parents divorced and she moved away, they stayed in touch. "Sure, just pick a place and let me know later." After hanging up, Song Wensi stayed in bed a bit longer. When her mind cleared, she finally got up, her stomach growling, and left her room. Zhou Ili had slept in the guest room on the first floor the night before. Now, the house was silent. Carefully checking her surroundings, she didn't find him, but on the dining table, a covered breakfast and a sticky note awaited her. "Don't forget to eat." Unlike most medical students' messy handwriting, Zhou Ili's characters were beautifully written in block script. She'd heard he was working at Yen City Hospital. She wondered if his medical records were as neat and readable as his notes. Since her international driver's license wasn't converted yet, she took a cab to the dinner venue that evening. When she arrived, her friends quickly surrounded her with hugs. The bond of growing up together always ran deeper than later formed friendships. Even after years apart, they quickly rekindled the camaraderie they once shared. They chatted about their lives, catching up on each other's news. When the topic turned to Song Wensi, Wen Ning asked, "Are you staying for good this time?" Wensi nodded. "Yes." "And your boyfriend from abroad?" "We broke up." Wen Ning looked surprised, and Wensi laughed lightly. "To be honest, he wasn't really my boyfriend. I couldn't get rid of him. I came back this time to avoid him. He's a bit unhinged." "Really?" Wen Ning's surprise grew, but then she seemed to recall something. "Speaking of boyfriends, didn't you date someone before leaving the country? Do you still keep in touch?" "I saw him at the hospital a few days ago." Wensi knew she was referring to Zhou Ili and froze for a moment. Noticing her reaction, Wen Ning quickly changed the subject to avoid awkwardness. She refilled Wensi's glass, smiling. Let's not dwell on the past. Now that you're back, here's to a fresh and beautiful start. By the end of the evening, everyone was drunk. Luckily, a hotel was conveniently located next to the restaurant. The girls stumbled over to book rooms. Feeling nauseous, Song Wensi rushed to the bathroom as soon as she entered her room. When she came out, her phone rang. Why aren't you back yet? Zhou Yili's voice came through the receiver. Song Wensi was stunned for a moment. She gave a quick explanation but regretted it immediately after. You don't need to worry about me. I'm with friends and staying at a hotel tonight. I'm not going back. She ended the call hastily, feeling uneasy. She put her phone on silent mode for peace of mind. After resting briefly on the bed, she headed to the bathroom again. Preferring privacy, she'd booked a room for herself. It wasn't until after her shower that she realized she hadn't brought any change of clothes. Wrapping herself in a towel, she lay down on the bed. Drinking always gave her headaches, and tonight she'd had more than usual. Though not completely drunk, she felt awful. In her hazy state, someone knocked on the door. Peeking through the peephole, she saw Zhou Yili standing outside. Song Wensi opened the door. He called cautiously, hearing movement inside. Her friends were in the neighboring room, so after some hesitation, she opened the door. Zhou Yili was holding a bag. His expression flickered briefly when he saw her before quickly averting his gaze. He handed her the bag. Here's some hangover medicine. Take it. Go home early tomorrow. He left as quickly as he had come. Wensi stared at the medicine bag, lost in thought. After a while, she opened the water bottle inside, swallowed the pills, and yawned. Glancing down, she noticed the towel wrapped around her body and froze, her mind buzzing. The next day, she delayed her return for as long as possible. The memory of last night filled her with embarrassment, making her wish she could disappear. Fortunately, Zhou Yili called, saying he had an evening shift. Her joy was so palpable, she almost jumped for joy, repeatedly agreeing. Her steps home were much lighter. He had pre-ordered food for her, which was delivered in the evening. After washing her hands, she sat down to eat. Then the doorbell rang. Thinking it was the delivery person again, she ran to the door but froze when she saw who it was. Jiangzhe. Jiangzhe was the man from abroad that Wen Ning had mentioned. Strictly speaking, she'd never accepted his advances. His persistence had always been one-sided. I finally found you, Cici. She hadn't expected Jiangzhe to track her down. Memories of past encounters flooded back, paralyzing her. As soon as she recovered, she tried to shut the door. But he was quicker, forcing his way inside and grabbing her shoulders. Why are you avoiding me, Cici? Do you know how hard I've worked to find you? His grip was so strong that tears sprang to her eyes from the pain. She struggled, but it was futile. In desperation, she screamed, "Let me go! Jiangzhe, help!" In the isolated luxury of the villa neighborhood, the downside of peace and quiet became evident. No one could hear her cries for help. Left with no choice, she curled up, pleading, "Please, Jiangzhe, let me go. I'm begging you." Song Wensi had caught Jiangzhe's attention 2 years ago. Because they were both Chinese, she hadn't been on guard around him. About a year ago, he confessed his feelings to her. However, Song Wensi had no intention of dating, and she didn't like him romantically, so she firmly turned him down. She thought at most they'd stop being friends, but his behavior changed drastically after her rejection. Not only did he begin stalking her, but he also resorted to extreme measures, using self-harm to manipulate her. Once, he injured himself right in front of her. A knife slid across the back of his hand, the crimson blood soaking through his clothes and dripping onto her hands. Song Wensi was terrified beyond words. Song Wensi shakily took out her phone, but Jiangzhe snatched it from her hand. With a sinister laugh, he leaned close to her ear. "Cici, you can't escape. Why not just behave?" He pushed her against the wall, attempting to kiss her lips. Song Wensi turned her head, her lips landing on his cheek. When they were abroad, he had tried to force himself on her several times. During that time, Song Wensi stayed glued to her roommates and sought out a few male friends to accompany her everywhere for safety. She had thought about returning to China for peace of mind, knowing that the security there was better, plus her mother would be nearby. But she never expected Jiangzhe to follow her back. "Jiangzhe, this is illegal in China. Let go of me, let go." She was still trying to reason with him, but Jiangzhe, crazed, bit into her shoulder. It was hot, and Song Wensi was only wearing a tank top. The pale skin on her shoulder immediately bore deep, red bite marks. "It's fine. I've marked you now. You wouldn't dare report me, would you?" He roughly tried to tear off her clothes, but Song Wensi kept her arms pressed tightly against her chest. She struggled with all her might, tears falling freely. She thought she was done for today, but then she heard the sound of an engine approaching. Zhou Ili help. Song Wensi recognized it was Zhou Ili's car, and her dimmed eyes sparked with hope. Soon, a figure rushed in, pushing Jiangzhe off her. "Wensi." Jiangzhe didn't expect anyone to show up, and while he was stunned, Zhou Ili lunged at him. Fists landed quickly. Jiangzhe fell to the ground in a heap. Taking the chance, Song Wensi hurriedly hid behind Zhou Ili, trembling all over. "Are you okay?" Zhou Ili asked, his face grim as he looked at her. Song Wensi shook her head, gripping his arm tightly. Seeing that she was frightened, Zhou Ili gently patted her back to comfort her. Just then, Jiangzhe scrambled to his feet. "Damn it, you ruined everything." He cursed and charged at Zhou Ili, only to be kicked back with force. Seeing that he really couldn't win, Jiangzhe didn't hesitate to turn and run. Zhou Ili immediately gave chase. When they reached the door, Jiangzhe had locked it from the outside. Soon, Song Wensi followed. "Did he escape?" she asked. Zhou Ili nodded. Song Wensi's face turned pale. Zhou Ili called the police, and they arrived quickly. After taking a brief statement, night had fully fallen. Looking at Song Wensi, who appeared dazed, Zhou Ili's heart tightened. He hesitated for a moment before getting a glass of water and walking over. "You came back just to avoid him?" Zhou Ili's voice pulled Song Wensi back to reality. She bit her lip, silent for a long time before finally answering, "I guess so." Zhou Ili's eyes dimmed. He handed her the water without saying another word. The takeout left at the door had gone cold. He brought it into the kitchen, reheating it before bringing it back out. Song Wensi was still sitting on the couch, her long hair hanging over her face. Zhou Ili couldn't make out her expression, but her slightly trembling shoulders suggested she was still scared. He walked over and said, "It's okay. Until we catch him, I'll stay here with you." Song Wensi was momentarily stunned, then lifted her head. The tear stains on her face had dried, but her eyes were still red, revealing that this wasn't just a bad dream. "Why did you come back tonight? Didn't you say you were on duty?" Her fear of Jiangzhe had overpowered everything else, and she no longer tried to hide it. Zhou Ili paused for a moment. "I was worried you wouldn't eat properly." Song Wensi froze for a second. Since her return to China, her appetite had been poor, and Zhou Ili must have noticed. She felt a mix of emotions in her heart, memories flooding back. After a long silence, she whispered, "Thank you." True to his word, Zhou Ili took a long leave from the hospital the next day. In the afternoon, he took Song Wensi back to the police station. When they got home, they found her mother, Lin Shuying, and her stepfather, Zhou Yanting, had already returned. Surprise. Lin Shuying was a carefree woman. When her husband betrayed her, she had immediately divorced him, taking her daughter with her. She worked hard over the years, building herself up. Though she'd met some good men along the way, she never remarried while Song Wensi was young until she met Zhou Yanting 2 years ago. Song Wensi threw herself into her mother's arms. Seeing her face pale, Lin Shuying quickly realized something was wrong. She gently stroked Song Wensi's head and asked, "What's wrong, baby?" Song Wensi's eyes welled up again as she spoke. The police had said they would arrest Jiangja for trespassing, but even if they caught him, without any real harm, he'd only be detained for a few days. The fear surged again, and she couldn't hold back her tears. Song Wensi recounted everything that had happened over the past 2 years. In front of the police, she had blurred many details, but now, speaking it out loud, Zhou Yili's heart sank. Lin Shuying was equally shocked, hugging her daughter and shedding tears as well. "If I had known you had been suffering so much, I would have come to get you sooner." Song Wensi shook her head. After graduating last year, she had secured a job at a local hospital. It had been hard to get, and she didn't want to give it up. If Jiangja hadn't pushed her so hard, she probably wouldn't have come back. Song Wensi washed her face and, when she came out, saw Lin Shuying talking softly with Zhou Yanting. "What should we do? She has been through so much. Should we cancel our trip to Jiangqing? I'm worried about leaving her alone, and I can't keep asking Ollie to stay here with her." Song Wensi then realized her parents had other plans, and they had only returned to check on her. She felt a bit sad, but more than that, she felt embarrassed. She hadn't expected her return to add such a burden on her family. "Mom, Uncle, why don't I rent an apartment in the city? As long as Jiangja can't find me, everything will be fine. You don't need to worry." Zhou Yanting exchanged a look with Lin Shuying. Lin Shuying immediately shook her head. Before she could speak, Zhou Yili, who had been silent, suddenly spoke. "Why don't you stay at my place? It's near the hospital, and I can take care of you." Everyone in the room froze. Song Wensi quickly waved her hands. "No need to trouble yourself." Zhou Yili calmly replied, "It's no trouble." Lin Shuying immediately turned to Zhou Yili, her eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you, Ollie. If anything happens, please call me right away." Zhou Yili nodded. "Got it, sis." When Song Wensi got into Zhou Yili's car, she was still in a daze. Her mother had been comforting her until the car started moving. Song Wensi looked at the man in the driver's seat and recalled the scene when he saved her. Her disordered heart seemed to calm down a bit. Just as Zhou Yili had said, his place was very close to the hospital. A spacious flat in a prime location, with a minimalist gray and white color scheme, in line with his usual style. After bringing Song Wensi's luggage upstairs, Zhou Yili spoke in a calm tone. "You can unpack first. If you need anything, call me." Song Wensi nodded obediently. After a moment, she added, "Sorry to trouble you." Zhou Yili glanced at her, seemingly giving a faint smile, but said nothing, turning to go downstairs. Song Wensi took quite a while unpacking. When she went downstairs, Zhou Yili was on the phone. "Okay, got it. Love you." After coming back, Song Wensi hadn't asked about Zhou Yili's relationship status. She didn't expect to walk into such a scene. The brief conversation caused her heart to tighten. Just as she was about to retreat, she saw Zhou Yili suddenly turn around. I forgot to bring a towel. I'm going to buy one. Is there a supermarket nearby?" Song Wensi felt a little awkward. Watching him hang up, she carefully spoke. Zhou Yili raised an eyebrow. "There's a new one in the bathroom cabinet on the second floor." Song Wensi responded with a soft, "Oh," and then remembered the phone call just now. Would it be inconvenient for me to stay here?" It's fine." His casual response made her feel a bit self-conscious. Song Wensi didn't say anything more and turned to go back upstairs. At night, Song Wensi felt a little unwell and lay in bed, not wanting to move. Zhou Yili sent her a message, but there was no reply. Not long after, he called from around the corner, "Song Wensi, dinner's ready." Wensi mumbled a response and got out of bed. Her stomach felt bloated, likely because her period was coming. She washed her face and took a painkiller, then slowly made her way downstairs. Zhou Yili was already sitting at the dining table, eyeing her. When he saw her small face looking pale, he frowned and asked, Not feeling well? Song Wensi shook her head. She suspected it was due to all the ice she had eaten since returning. However, the painkiller she just took was quite effective. The two of them ate in silence. Halfway through the meal, Zhou Yili suddenly spoke. Lu Yan just called. He said there's a reunion this weekend. Are you interested in going? Song Wensi, who was drinking soup, froze when she heard Lu Yan's name. She didn't swallow in time and started coughing violently. Why so excited? Zhou Yili handed her a tissue. Song Wensi shook her head, suddenly recalling a scene from years ago. She paused for a moment, forcing a smile. I think I'll pass. I'm not really close with them, and it would be awkward since we haven't seen each other in so many years. It was just a casual question, but Song Wensi's reaction was too strange. Zhou Yili gave her a deep look, but didn't say anything further. He poured a glass of water and handed it to her. Lu Yan was Zhou Yili's good friend, and they hung out a lot in university. He remembered that Song Wensi was quite familiar with Lu Yan, but one day, she suddenly stopped talking to him. Not long after that, Song Wensi broke up with Zhou Yili. Could this have something to do with Lu Yan? Zhou Yili called Lu Yan back, informing him that he wouldn't be attending the reunion, and also brought up Song Wensi. Lu Yan was surprised. Wensi came back. Song Wensi hadn't told many people about her return. If it weren't for Zhou Yanting, Zhou Yili would have been in the dark too. But that wasn't the reason he called. Did you hide anything from me about you and Song Wensi? There was a 3-second silence on the other end of the line, followed by an angry shout. Zhou Yili could feel his fury even through the phone. Lu Yan yelled, "What do you mean? Are you suggesting she broke up with you because of me? What do you take me for? How could I be involved with my brother's woman?" Zhou Yili realized how absurd his thoughts were. Song Wensi and Lu Yan thinking about it was impossible. He had really let his imagination run wild. Zhou Yili apologized to Lu Yan. But Lu Yan was curious. Why bring her up suddenly? Did you see her? Zhou Yili didn't hide anything and told him everything. Lu Yan jumped up in surprise, speaking incoherently. Your ex-girlfriend turned into your niece? Is this some kind of drama? Was the meeting awkward? And wait, you said she's staying at your place now. Zhou Yili pushed his glasses up and simply murmured, Lu Yan let out a sharp noise. Even Xiong Yao wouldn't dare to write something like this. The two of them talked for a while longer before hanging up. Zhou Yili sat there, holding his phone, lost in thought. Outside, he heard footsteps. Soon, Song Wensi's voice came from the door, cautiously speaking, Zhou Yili, I want to go out and buy some things. The sanitary pads were bought half an hour later, and Song Wensi's face turned red in the moment. In her rush, she'd forgotten many things, and when she went to the bathroom, she realized she only had pantoliners with her. Thank you. She didn't know what other word to use to describe her emotions, besides feeling awkward. Zhou Yili remained calm, lowering his gaze and speaking softly. It's fine. Song Wensi went to the bathroom and only then noticed how red her face was in the mirror. She'd always had issues with dysmenorrhea, and back in school, every time it hit, he would bring hot water to her dorm. They used to be the perfect couple in everyone's eyes. Handsome guy, beautiful girl. If she hadn't overheard Zhou Yili and Lu Yan's conversation that day, maybe they wouldn't have broken up. But who can predict matters of the heart? When Song Wensi returned to her room, she found a cup of brown sugar water and a hot water bag waiting for her at the door. She sighed and silently picked them up. She caught a glimpse of a figure at the corner and didn't dare turn around. 6 years had passed. He had a girlfriend now, while she still couldn't forget that moment and his words. How could she go back now? When Lu Yan arrived, Zhou Yili had just rushed out to the hospital after receiving a call. The doorbell made Song Wensi jump. She only relaxed after seeing Lu Yan through the peephole. She didn't know Lu Yan knew she was back and hesitated whether to open the door. But then Lu Yan's voice came through. Wensi, it's me. Seeing Lu Yan standing in front of her, Song Wensi was momentarily stunned. It brought back memories from many years ago when she and Zhou Yili had argued over a trivial matter. Song Wensi had said hurtful things in anger, and later when she went to apologize, she had accidentally overheard a conversation between him and Liu Yan. That brat Wensi's temper. Only you can tolerate her. Look how spoiled she's become.
Zhou Yili sighed.
You know, kids from single-parent families tend to be more sensitive and suspicious. We've been together for 2 years, and sometimes her temper really gets to me. Song Wensi hadn't expected him to say that in front of his friend. Coincidentally, her mother had met a foreign boyfriend around that time, and she decided to break up with Zhou Yili. Soon after, she went abroad with her mom. What brings you here? Zhou Yili went to the hospital, Song Wensi asked, snapping out of her thoughts. Liu Yan smiled. It's fine, I came to see you. Song Wensi had been close to Liu Yan, but after so many years with no contact, she wasn't sure what his purpose was in visiting her. His serious expression, however, made her step aside. They sat on the sofa. Song Wensi poured him a glass of water and asked, "What's the matter?" She had harbored some resentment towards Liu Yan for a while, feeling like it was his influence that led to Zhou Yili's comments about her. But over time, she realized how foolish that thought was. It wasn't Liu Yan who hurt their relationship, it was Zhou Yili himself. Why involve anyone else? Yili's had a hard time these past years. He doesn't say it, but I know he never really got over you. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone 6 years without dating anyone. I don't know what happened between you two, but since you're back, I hope you can talk and work things out. Song Wensi froze. She remembered that phone call from the other day. Hadn't Zhou Yili had a girlfriend? What did Liu Yan mean by that? That night, Zhou Yili returned very late. When he saw Song Wensi curled up on the sofa, he paused for a moment. Just as he bent down to carry her back to her room, Song Wensi opened her eyes. You're back. She struggled to get up from the sofa, her words slurring. Zhou Yili nodded slightly. He washed his hands and then noticed Song Wensi standing behind him. He furrowed his brow. You have something to say? Zhou Yili had assumed she had just fallen asleep on the couch, but now it seemed like that wasn't the case. Song Wensi nodded. Well, she'd spent the whole afternoon thinking about it, and she finally decided to talk to him. But before she could speak, her phone suddenly rang. Sorry, I need to take this. It was an unknown number. Song Wensi answered, and the line was quiet for a moment before an eerie scream pierced the air. With a loud crash, Song Wensi jumped, and the phone fell from her hand. The call was immediately disconnected, and the screen went black. What happened? Zhou Yili asked, frowning. Song Wensi was still in shock, trying to process the sound she had just heard. When Zhou Yili picked up the phone and handed it back to her, she finally snapped out of her daze. It's Jiang Zhe, it must be him. He had done this before, sending strange packages to her place or calling in the middle of the night after she rejected him. Fear overwhelmed her, and Song Wensi clung to Zhou Yili, her body trembling with terror. Zhou Yili's face darkened. Only now did he realize the severity of the situation. Jiang Zhe's mindset seemed to have twisted to a dangerous degree. The next day, Zhou Yili went to the police station again to report last night's incident. He quickly returned home after that. That night, Song Wensi had a fever and kept crying, clinging to him in a delirious state. Once she finally took her medicine and the fever subsided a bit, Zhou Yili had time to head to the police station. Song Wensi was still asleep, her face pale. When she heard the sound, she opened her eyes and groggily called, Ollie. She used to call him that when they were together. She always said it was a name just for her. In the countless days and nights since they broke up, Zhou Yili often wondered if he would ever hear it again. But now, she was back, and she was right there beside him. When Song Wensi woke up, her head still hurt. As she moved her sore body, ready to turn, she realized there was an arm draped over her waist. Turning her head, she found herself face to face with Zhou Yili. She froze for 3 seconds before snapping to full consciousness.
Ah.
Her scream broke the silence in the room. Zhou Ili shifted slightly, but pulled her deeper into his embrace. "Zhou, go back to sleep." His voice was hoarse, filled with exhaustion. Song Wensi was completely confused. How had she ended up with him in her bed? "Did we? You wouldn't let me leave." Fragmented memories began to resurface, and Song Wensi stood frozen in place. Zhou Ili made kanji and brought it to Song Wensi's bedside. Song Wensi felt embarrassed and at a loss, hesitating for a while before speaking up. "Thank you for this time, and I'm really sorry." Zhou Ili didn't say anything, simply handing her a spoon. Song Wensi took it, and then Zhou Ili asked, "What were you going to say to me that day?" Song Wensi was stunned for a moment. Some things only seem to come out when you intend to say them. After the moment passes, it's hard to know how to express them. She bit her lip. "Actually, it's nothing." After a few days of rest, Song Wensi gradually recovered. Zhou Ili's holiday was over, and he had to return to the hospital. Before heading to work, he stopped by the police station. Upon learning that there were still no leads on Jiang Zhe, he couldn't help but feel a bit anxious. Jiang Zhe was clearly mentally unstable, and until he was caught, there would always be a sense of danger. At the hospital, a colleague hurried over to him. Seeing Zhou Ili, the colleague pulled him aside. A patient was just brought in, stabbed in a fight, massive arterial bleeding, quickly, come help. Zhou Ili quickly changed into his gear, but was surprised to see Jiang Zhe's face. Why was it him? Zhou Ili took the tools from his colleague, quietly relieved. Jiang Zhe was unconscious in the hospital for now, meaning Wensi was temporarily safe. He planned to report it to the police before Jiang Zhe woke up, ensuring everything would be foolproof. However, just as he was finishing up with Jiang Zhe's treatment, he heard a panicked shout outside. "Not good. The new patient just came in, HIV positive." That evening, Song Wensi didn't receive any calls from Zhou Ili, and by night, she realized something was wrong. Normally, he would check in every time he went out, making sure she was safe. Why was today so unusual? With this doubt in her mind, Wensi held off until 10 p.m. When he still hadn't called, she couldn't sit still anymore and dialed his number. "Are you on shift tonight?" The line was quiet for a long time before Zhou Ili finally responded. "There's some stuff going on at the hospital. I might not be able to make it back. Take care of yourself at home." Song Wensi was stunned, but didn't say anything else. After hanging up, she looked up the number for Yanqing Hospital online. With Zhou Ili acting so strangely, she couldn't believe it was just about something at the hospital. Her gut told her that something big had happened, and she needed to confirm it. When Wensi arrived at the dormitory, it was Zhou Ili's colleague who guided her in. On the way, he gave her a mask and cautioned, only a small amount of blood got into the eyes. After rinsing, the risk isn't high, but you still need to be careful. Avoid close contact. His colleague briefly explained the situation, and Wensi felt weighed down with worry, her thoughts in turmoil. A small risk was still a risk, and now all she could do was pray that he would be okay. Zhou Ili was kept in isolation on a separate floor. He was supposed to go home, but fearing he might alarm Wensi, he had applied for special permission from the hospital leadership. When Wensi saw him, she paused for a moment, and then coldly he asked, "Who told you to come?" Wensi's eyes welled up with tears, and before he could finish speaking, she threw herself into his arms. She had heard from his colleague that the man's name was Jiang Zhe, and that he had been sent to the hospital early that morning. Zhou Ili had called the police before he was isolated, and once Jiang Zhe regained consciousness, the police would immediately take him away. "I'm sorry, Zhou Ili, I really am. I'm the one who caused this, I'm so sorry." Wensi didn't know what else to say as her tears fell, repeatedly apologizing. She was terrified, so terrified. She had been scared on the way here, and even more scared when she saw him. But Zhou Ili pushed her away, his dark eyes mixed with anger. "This isn't your fault. I'm a doctor. Saving lives is my responsibility. Song Wensi, listen to me. Go home. Don't worry, I'm fine." but how could she relax? After 6 years apart, she had never forgotten him for even a moment. He had once asked her if she had returned to escape Jiangzhe. She had answered, kind of. Only she knew, in the countless nights of restless sleep, that face would always appear in her mind, asking her over and over why they broke up. I'm not leaving. Wensi refused to let go. Zhou Ili was helpless. Song Wensi, listen to me. He tried to push her away by the shoulders, but Wensi suddenly kissed him. Are you crazy? Zhou Ili was startled and pushed her away. Wensi, however, smiled, her eyes red. His heart softened, and he reached out his hand to her. Wensi sobbed a few times before once again throwing herself into his arms. For weeks felt like a century. During this time, Lin Shuring visited once. Seeing them, she couldn't help but shed tears. She knew her daughter had dated someone during university, but she had never known who that person was. Zhou Ili protected her from behind and bowed respectfully to Lin Shuring. In the end, Lin Shuring didn't say anything, but after leaving, she sent a message to Song Wensi. I respect your choice, but as a mother, I only wish for your safety. On the day the results came out, Zhou Ili was trembling all over. Song Wensi was no better. Her entire body felt cold, and she couldn't sense any warmth. The paper was light and thin, yet it carried so much hope. Fortunately, the results were good. The word negative made both Song Wensi and Zhou Ili breathe a sigh of relief. Does this mean it's all right now? Probably, but you'll need a follow-up in 3 months. Song Wensi's tears came down heavily, stumbling as she followed Zhou Ili. Then she felt a sudden urge to laugh and did so without restraint. Zhou Ili watched her the entire time, his expression complex. The moment Song Wensi looked up, kisses rained down on her. He had waited so long for this moment. He missed her. He missed her so much. From the moment she came back, he wanted to kiss her deeply, to hold her like this. Jiangzhe was taken away by his family, diagnosed with a mental illness, and couldn't be sentenced. However, his parents made a promise not to let him harm others again. Wensi wasn't sure how much she could trust that promise, but there was nothing she could do against someone whom the law couldn't punish. After Lin Shuring and Zhou Yanting returned, they went back to their family home together. On the way, Zhou Ili held Song Wensi's hand tightly and nervously asked, "What if they don't agree to us being together? What should we do?" Song Wensi responded with a question. How about we elope? Zhou Ili smiled. Do you love me that much? Song Wensi froze for a moment before replying. Actually, she had already tested her mother's reaction by sending a message. It seemed that Uncle Zhou didn't have any objections, and her mother, it seemed, wasn't opposed either. Zhou Ili's smile froze. How much do you love me? A lot, a lot. Song Wensi later learned the full story from Liu Yan. After she had left that day, Zhou Ili still had something else to say to Liu Yan, but she hadn't heard it all. He said, even though sometimes she gets a little upset, I'm willing to tolerate it because I love her. I know it's my fault if she gets upset. If I give her enough sense of security, she won't act unreasonable. And you? Zhou Ili had asked. Do you love me? Zhou Ili slowly turned back. I love you a little more than you love me. The wind brushed past their ears, and their hearts were tightly pressed together. 6 years had passed, crossing oceans, and in the face of love, nothing was an obstacle. Song Wensi suddenly remembered that phone call that day. By the way, when I came to your house, who were you talking to on the phone? I think I heard something I shouldn't have. Zhou Ili paused, as if recalling, and quickly smiled. That was my aunt. Song Wensi seemed to recall something. Zhou Ili's mother had passed away during childbirth, and it was his aunt who had raised him. Wensi smiled again, throwing herself into his arms and gripping his hand tightly. This time, she wouldn't let go.